The NFL draft is over, and we still have questions about the Minnesota Vikings draft process. How is Kwesi Adofo-Mensah prioritizing assets? How is he looking to make moves up and down the board? Is he doing it with the right values in mind? Is he prioritizing players over picks? How does all that matter when we're talking about the 2024 NFL draft class for your Minnesota Vikings? We're going to have a nice conversation about it here on a special episode. Well, special time, because we have power again, of the Real Forno Show. Strap in. Let's have some fun.
Welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by Tyler Forness, publisher at The Sporting News, contributor on SKOL North's Purple Daily, publisher of Substack Run In Shooter, the host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a special time of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, is producer Dave. And we weren't able to go live last night because some bozo decided to play a little snippy with the power line. But we are back. Everything's fixed. And listen, everything is bigger than Texas, including a big episode of the Real Forno Show at noon Central Time. So let's dive right in. We've had a lot of conversations already over the course of this past weekend, which, if you did not watch our live draft coverage on Friday and Saturday, it's great background noise. I've been kind of watching some of the stuff over the weekend. I watched the SKOL North Purple Daily draft party because, well, I'm a sicko. So I continue to kind of watch stuff, and it's good to get a sense of kind of everything that's going on, other opinions. And look, there's never too much NFL draft. I was telling Dave before the show, I have the 2004 NFL draft on while I was doing my work. And Robert Gallery just went second overall to the Oakland Raiders. And look, there's a lot of different things to talk about, and we're going to start that conversation here. Dave, before I kind of get into the weeds here, process-wise with these Minnesota Vikings, what did you think overall about the process that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah used? Because it's very, very interesting.
Hey, like I said on Sunday, he went for quality over quantity, and I'm for that. He's taking this draft, I think, to make a statement, because he has to. I mean, the average length of an NFL GM is the same as a player, 3.5 years. So he's looking to putting the final foundation pieces until free agency of next year into this squad and open that competitive Super Bowl window. The plan is, I think it's been a 4-year plan from get-go, and that they will be in it in 2025. We will compete this year, however, but 2025, I think, is the golden target, and I think he's done a good job at that.
Yeah, we're going to kind of look at some things, because when you look at how many picks that the Minnesota Vikings currently have and moving forward, and that's going to be a big part of the conversation, is valuing current and future assets and how to use them. Because Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is considered the analytics general manager. Let's be honest. Some of the stuff he's doing is feeling a little anti-analytics. And I think analytics itself needs to have a broader discussion, because there's the public perception of analytics, which is Pro Football Focus. That is what people believe analytics to be. That's not entirely the case. Now, Pro Football Focus is analytics, but it's a section of analytics. It's like going to the meat department and calling the meat department steak. Steak is a big part of the meat department in your grocery store, but it is not the only thing that the meat department has. You're going to have hot dogs, pork, ribs, chicken, bratwurst, all kinds of stuff.
A few other things. You can get exotic and have seafood and all sorts of wonderful neat stuff.
Absolutely. And that's the big thing. It's an oversimplification. Pro Football Focus is a big part of what analytics is, but it is not all of analytics. So there are different ways to answer questions, and some people believe their way to be correct. Some people believe that theirs is. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is answering his own answering questions in his own way. So when you kind of take a look at how he's answering some of these questions, it raises some interesting points, and it kind of raises some red flags. I wrote about 2,000 words for Arif Hassan's Wide Left Substack discussing the Minnesota Vikings process going into this draft and coming out of it. So I'm glad that Kwesi didn't make any other trades, because he made technically 3 trades with first round picks in this draft. So let's start with the trade up with the Houston Texans. It was expensive. And when you take a look at it, it's a frustrating one. So when you take a look at the conventional trade charts, and what we're doing here is we're using a pick or a future pick value of a 55% depreciation, which is historically what the NFL has used. Okay. Now you can make an argument that it does not make sense to use it that way because that's not how the data is kind of shifted. Well, we're using what the NFL has set, because those are the parameters that we're working with. We're working with it based on what the market is telling us rather than the outcomes. And I think that's the biggest difference between like the Jimmy Johnson, the Rich Hill trade chart, which are market price value charts. How much does the pick cost? If you go to the grocery store, the pound of ground beef, and I'm going to use this analogy a lot, is $5, where the analytics-based value charts are about outcomes. It's about, that is a bacon cheeseburger, not a pound of ground beef. It is a bacon cheeseburger. So you're talking about what that ground beef is going to become over what that ground beef currently is. All right. So that's the difference between those two value charts. On the Rich Hill and Jimmy Johnson, the Vikings won. They gave up an early fourth. Sorry, they got an early fourth back in value from the Jimmy Johnson and a mid-third for the Rich Hill. But the outcomes-based value charts, they lost. Chase Stewart, they gave up a mid-5. Fitzgerald Spielberger, which is based heavily on like second contracts, they gave up a mid-6th. And PFF, they gave up a late 6th. So you're also giving up 2 second-round picks, which 2 second-round picks theoretically is, Dave, it's 2 starters. Because that's what second round picks should be. They should be starting caliber players for your football team. Whether that be year 1 or year 2, they should be starters. So essentially, the Vikings gave up 2 starters to hedge their bet at quarterback. And I think that's a really important thing. This was insurance to help them have more assets to get that quarterback. And what's fascinating about this is they didn't have to use it to get the quarterback. So then that brings up other questions, Dave. It answers the question of, did you need to make this trade? The answer is a flat out no. You did not need to make this trade, and you misread the market. Now, but they
didn't know that at the time.
So here's my argument against it, and I'm going to give credit to Arif Hassan, my editor at Wide Left. Go subscribe. Arif has some incredible stuff, especially concerning the consensus board coming out. The big thing here, Dave, it is their job to know that. It is their job to read the room. It is their job to know what their contemporaries are going to do and understand the marketplace. So in that sense, it is their fault. Now, do I blame them for wanting to hedge? Do I blame them for wanting to have that asset just to make sure in case they needed to use that pick? Not necessarily. I don't blame them. But considering that JJ McCarthy was available at 10th overall and you only had to trade a 4th and 5th to go get him, to me, that is misreading the marketplace. And you could have done better with your assets. And this is where it comes into play. And this is where I have some concerns about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's team building strategy moving forward. Look, we see this trade. When we talk about the Dallas Turner trade, we're not going to reference this because to me, 2 separate deals. All right. I think this is, Dave, kind of with the sunk cost fallacy. You don't, because you've already have the sunk cost, should not impact your decision making moving forward. You should still make good decisions and decisions you believe are best for your football team. You don't want to double down on a bad decision. If you consider this a bad decision, that shouldn't impact how you kind of move forward. You still want to make what you think is the best decision.
Yeah, but this trade was made in mind. First off, the Texans wanted this trade so they could go get Stephon Diggs, right? That was the purpose of this trade.
You know what's funny about that? They didn't end up giving up the 42nd pick. It was a 2025 second, which in turn is hilarious.
But that was the intent. And the intent on Kwesi's part was, we now have insurance that we can move up, hopefully into the top 3 or 4 to get the QB we want, right? That was the purpose of this trade. They got it. They attempted it. It failed. So it wasn't used. But they did use it in the way it was intended to. It was, on one of the earlier remarks, was confirming the offers made to the Patriots. It was part of that offer trade. Now, what I've read about it, it was our first one at 11, the 23, next year's first, and we were asking for a third to be kicked back, and then we were swapping late round picks of some sort. That the intent was there. The intent worked perfectly. The execution is what failed. And I think that's what Arif's pointing to, is the execution didn't work out. And because the execution didn't work out for whatever reasons, it's a fail. He thinks it's a fail because Kwesi didn't completely get it right and read the room. But I think it's still a good process because, see, this is where I disagree with Arif, because they were targeting and they went through the motions to get most likely Drake May at number 3, and they attempted it. Patriots have to be complicit. And I saw one Pat's viewer complain or remark, well, you didn't offer enough. It wasn't, precedent setting. It wasn't enough. It didn't even match the Trey Lance trade. Of course we turned it down. Well, hey, it was significant. Anytime you get 3 ones, even if you're kicking back stuff, it's significant. But the whole process of going through that, I believe, was the correct process. And I'm not going to dig them for that.
And see, this is where I think it's an objective opinion rather than subjective, because the idea is, like, I think this trade is fine in a vacuum, but you can also argue because they made this trade to go get a quarterback and then they didn't end up having to use this at all, was misreading the market. And I think that in itself is a fair criticism. So I think both things can be true. The trade is fine, but they also didn't have to make it and give up that kind of value. So to me, if you want to sit on either end of the fence, I completely get it. But I also think it's important to note those two things, because we're trying to understand how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is utilizing process as a whole, rather than just look at it in one analogous trade or one little part of his process, because we still don't know how he's going to approach things. With Rick Spielman, it became very easy how he was going to approach things. And we would like to get to a point where we understand him more. But I think in terms, and there's been some, this comment from Mike Sullivan, if you're going to complain about giving up a couple mid-round picks to get a future franchise quarterback, you're nuts. Well, we're not there yet, but I'm not going to complain about that singular trade. But we're talking about everything. We're talking about every piece of his process to try and understand what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. And it's a little bit less about the results and it's more about the process, because the process in this case is very important. So let's go to that trade for J.J. McCarthy. Let's talk about the trade with the New York Jets, because this is the next piece of the puzzle. They gave up 11, 129, and 157. They got 10 and 203. The conventional market charts, they gave up a mid-6th or a late 4th. On the analytics charts, early 4th, mid-4th. And you can see everything right here. This is from, it's Hefe's handiwork, I think it is. He just compiled everything, put it into a system, and then makes it easy. So it's just easy to read, easy to digest. and something that can help you understand trade values. So this, to me, is a nothing burger. The Vikings win this trade more often than not. Why? Quarterback. And the thing is, and even with, I don't use the Baldwin chart because the Baldwin chart does not have the quarterback element factored in. And he's been very, very open about that, because trading for a quarterback and getting it, no problem, because quarterback is such a valuable piece to your football team. So if you need to give up a 4th round pick in value to go get your quarterback, I think that's great. That's perfectly fine with me. I don't have an issue with it. So to me, this trade is good. They confirmed that they were getting their guy. We don't know if they were trying to trade even higher up to go get that guy, but giving up this kind of value, this was more than the Eagles gave up to go get Jalen Carter last year. They gave up just a future 4th, which was this year, to go get him. And you know what? Even then, that's fine to give up like a little bit extra value. They gave up that 4th, which was current, and then they swapped their 5th round for the Jets' 6th. That's fine. I don't have an issue with it. I don't think we should have an issue with it. So you get JJ McCarthy, you have your quarterback of the future, and you're sitting in a good spot. But now comes the interesting part of the discussion, which is the trade up for Dallas Turner. And I see the comments, and this is 100% not about the Vikings getting a blue chip edge rusher and a top quarterback prospect. The players are great, but you also have to look at it from a big picture perspective when you're talking about team building. And we do have cap space next year, but you have to pay market value, where the Vikings giving up 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks next year, those could be 2 starters and a quality backup that you're paying rookie contracts to. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, you get a camp.
But what Arif didn't put into that, how many busts fall into those categories? And we know it's the slope of, only 40 some odd % of DBs are considered good.
Let's look at it at an average level, okay? Let's say about 35% of 2nd round picks hit, like 25% of 3rd round picks, 20% of 4th round picks, okay? Theoretically,
it's actually
if you
less
get,
than that, but go ahead.
I'm just throwing out numbers. I don't have everything in front of me. You have a chance to get 2 starters and a quality rotational piece on rookie contracts with those 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks. At your highest end, you're getting 3 really good starters. You're getting the guys who can be starters for you. And at a 2nd round pick value, that guy in year 4 is going to be making less than $4 million. And if he's a wide receiver and he turns out to be a high-end wide receiver too, that's a surplus value of like $16 million. That's what you're giving up. And that needs to be part of the discussion. It is not a guarantee that they hit. You are 100% right. But the opportunity cost to not have that pick to go get Dallas Turner is a big part of this discussion, because now you don't have the opportunity to have a 2nd round pick to get that kind of surplus value. You don't have the opportunity to get those picks in round 3 and round 4 who can be good depth pieces for your team. Can't bind him. He's going to be one of the top paid safeties in the league after this year, 4th round pick. Like these are your opportunity costs. And is it super important? That's a great debate. That's a great discussion. But we have to understand that Dallas Turner needs to be at a certain level to be okay with giving up those kind of resources, because that's a really important factor when you're building a team long term. This isn't a complete team. And because this isn't a complete team, taking this kind of chance is a risk. It is a big risk. But, and we can kind of take a look here, okay?
But also not taking it's a risk.
Mm-hmm. No, not taking it is less of a risk. And I'll kind of explain why. Dave, actually, I have one more graphic I'm going to send you, because there is, I want to use this in having this conversation, because what I ended up doing was taking a look at what it would have cost to go get the 9th overall pick, which was where the Minnesota Vikings ended up that's where Dallas Turner was valued, was the 9th overall pick. And because of that, when you have the 9th overall pick, I'm going to send this here to you real quick. If you trade up to the 9th overall pick, it's a significantly different discussion. I think that's where Kwesi's process is so fascinating. But let's take a look at the move in totality the way it is. Okay. So as I said earlier, I am not including that Houston Texans trade because I think it's a different conversation. It's two moves that are separate. Now, like when you look at how the Buffalo Bills acquired Josh Allen, they explicitly moved up from 22 to 12, and then they moved up from 12 to 7 for the quarterback. To me, those two are incredibly linked. If this would have been the move up to get 23, and then we package that for J.J. McCarthy, I would consider that all the same. This, to me, is different because you did not acquire this pick, in theory, to get Dallas Turner. And I like, Mike, I see in the chat saying everyone needs to calm down. We're not saying that this is bad. We're just trying to understand the process. And understanding the process, to me, is really important to identify how this team's going to project forward, how this team is going to continue to build, so we can understand what's going on and understand both sides of it. So the Vikings did give up some value here. They did get value back with the market trade charts, which I think is important. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has, with his trade downs, not done a great job with the market value trade charts. He does get back a value of an early 4 with the Jimmy Johnson and an early 5 with the Rich Hill, but he gives up a mid 4, a late 3, an early 4 with the Stewart over the cap and PFF charts. So the process charts, where you're talking about outcomes, you're talking about what is Dallas Turner going to be. Those charts don't like the trade. Now, if Dallas Turner becomes a top flight edge rusher, let's say he's a top 10 edge in 3-4 years, which I don't think is an absurd take. It is possible for him to get there. That's a good outcome. So even though you gave up, you're getting like a 90th, 100th percentile outcome. So it works out in your favor. But if Turner becomes an average guy, if he becomes Yannick Ngakoue, you lose, and you lose in a big way. So it is a risk. Now, here's the caveat for making this trade, which is why I think it's a little bit different than if you're trading up for a wide receiver, an offensive lineman. Edge rushers historically need to be great athletes in order to become great at the position. And Dallas Turner is a freak athlete. He is a next level athlete when it comes to explosiveness. I believe he set a record with a 41.5-inch vertical jump. I wish we had the 3 cone. And then on North Dakota, Reef was also talking about the idea of how quick he is off the ball. And he was trying to get that information because, like, those who do GPS tracking, like Next Gen Stats, they have that kind of information. But he wasn't able to get it. He's very quick off the ball. And because of those traits, like, this is like when the Vikings made the bet on Danielle Hunter around 3, even though he had little production, it was a great bet because he was a 96th percentile athlete. Now, Turner is a little bit smaller. He ran in the 4.4s, but he was weighed in under 250 pounds at, I believe, 6'2 3/4. That in itself does not translate necessarily perfectly when it comes to relative athletic score. If we weighed 265 and add all those numbers, he'd be a lot higher as far as his relative athletic score. But when you look at just the traits themselves, looks really good. Okay. So taking that bet on an edge rusher will inherently be smarter than if you were to trade up for an offensive lineman or wide receiver, where you don't have to necessarily be the most phenomenal athlete to be super successful at those positions. And I think that in itself is an important conversation. Now, Dave, do you have that graphic ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. Throw up that graphic, because Dallas Turner's 9th on the consensus board and he fell to 17th. My theory is the Vikings and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah prioritized the player and did not prioritize the draft picks. So the Vikings prioritize getting Dallas Turner. And as you can see, they crush it with value by trading up to the 9th overall pick. And that is where I think this discussion becomes really, really, really interesting. I don't think it's a 1-to-1, and I don't think that you can necessarily justify moving up to get a player that's higher on the consensus board. But I think it's a interesting part of how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is using this process. So if you take a look, the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, which is a market chart, gained a mid-second round pick. Rich Hill trade chart, based on historical trade chart values, gained a mid-second round pick. The Chase Stewart chart, which is a outcomes-based chart, even trade, 100%. Over the cap, you give up an early 6th. PFF, you get a late 7th. So essentially, the outcomes charts are a wash. The market chart, you're winning. And my theory is this. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah prioritized the value of the player, where he believed that this was a top 10 player and was okay necessarily, quote unquote, losing out in the trade charts because he got that top 10 player. And the reason why we talked about all those other elements to the process is because I think it's fair to look at it from just a process standpoint and a market standpoint for what you gave up to go get this player. But now it's also fair with how I believe Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is attacking this. He believes he got a top 10 player at a near 20th overall pick value. So when you look at it from the 9th overall pick, which was his spot on the consensus board, and that's what you gave up to get him. 23, 188, mid 3 and mid 4 next year. That's pretty damn good. And I think the process is going to be consistently interesting to watch. And I do want to point this out. There are some people talking, oh, but we have compensatory picks next year. Sure, that's great. But that doesn't mean you light other picks on fire because you have other ones. You still want to utilize good process with every single selection. So if it's not good process in how you utilize that 3rd and 4th round pick to move up for this trade, and that's your opinion, you don't just all of a sudden make a bad decision because you have other assets to use. That's how the San Francisco 49ers, when they were making those runs with Colin Kaepernick and Jim Harbaugh, that's why when they ended up collapsing, because they were throwing away 2nd round picks on running backs with massive injuries who never played. You have to be smart with your assets. You can take a bigger swing when you have a really stout foundation for a football team. The Detroit Lions made a bet where they traded a 3rd round pick next year to get a 4th round pick and took an offensive lineman from British Columbia named Giovanni Manu. He could be a next level athlete. He could be a great football player someday, like the next Jordan Mailata. But it's still a risky bet when you're taking that big of a swing. So it's a very interesting process, Dave. And I'm really, really, really curious how this is going to play out for the Vikings. Because if Dallas Turner hits, nobody's going to give a shit what the price was. If JJ McCarthy hits, like if the Vikings gave up 3 first-round picks for JJ McCarthy, I don't think people would have been thrilled, but they would have got it. And if he hits, nobody cares about losing those first-round picks. But giving away so much mid-round capital and premium picks to get one premium position player, I think is one that can be fairly criticized. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the process plays out and how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah continues to prioritize some of these picks, because after 2022, he has traded his 2nd round pick in 2023, 2024, 2025. He traded his 3rd round pick in 2024, 2025. And now he's also traded multiple 4th round picks away. So does Kwesi Adofo-Mensah just not value the draft in a way that other general managers? I don't have that answer, but I will say this. He was very explicit after his first draft. He talked about how you don't need to take 10 players every year. It's okay to have a smaller draft class because of what's on your roster, because you don't want to pick 10 guys and all of a sudden have to cut 2 of them because you have no roster space for them. And I think there's merit to that. But how far is too far? Has he gone too far by giving up so much draft capital for 2025? Is there something that he knows that we don't about the 2025 draft class? Or is it pretty much a guarantee if the Vikings end up picking around 11th or 12th next year that he's going to trade down and get 2nd and 4th round picks back, and all of a sudden the draft class looks a lot different? A lot of variables here, but his process is so fascinating to me because there's so many layers and elements to it.
Okay. I think it's Kwesi identifying two foundational pieces that are going to succeed, going for it, and he's rolling the dice, his job on it. He's literally putting his job on it. Now he's got one more draft to complete his masterpiece. And I think he's setting up to do that with known quantities that, yes, they don't come in at a rookie pay scale, but you don't have the risk of the bust. You already know what they're getting, and you're going to pay for it. But that known quantities coming in to finish out that picture. And I think it's going to be good. We'll find out. I mean, we don't know squat until the games are played, and we see actually how these people play, i.e. like Lewis Seen. And I think that was a learning curve on him. So we'll find out if he makes the right decision. He's betting his job on it.
Yeah. And this is an interesting part about like the psychology of general managers. A lot of times they will have a little too much hubris. And here's kind of what I mean by that. They will put their entire life's work on one or two football players. Is that a good idea? Well, it's never a bad idea if you're right. Then that's the difficult part. But oftentimes you're wrong. So how is this going to turn out for Kwesi? I don't know. But the only thing we can do is judge the process that he uses. And then once we get the results, try to understand a little bit more of how he got there. And only time will tell. But I think the results being that you have the consensus top edge rusher on the board, and you got JJ McCarthy, who's a phenomenal fit for what you want to do on offense. I think those two in itself are great players to add to this football team. And I think that needs to be separated from the process itself, because the process itself is incredibly questionable. Not for the trade up for JJ McCarthy, objectively fine. No worries. They didn't give up like a future second or something to go make that trade. They gave up 4th and 5th round picks and got a 6th back. You got your quarterback. Completely fine. You could have given up Jordan Addison. Like if you would have given up like 11 and Jordan Addison to go to 6, I don't think anybody's complaining, because you still have 23. You got your quarterback of the future. Yeah. Does it suck to give up Addison? Sure. But you didn't give up any other draft capital to go do it. There's very little data when it comes to there's too much to pay for a quarterback if you're right.
Well, see, that's so like Jordan Addison is now known quantity.
Kind of, yeah. But
future draft capital is unknown.
Yeah. But would you rather give up 2 first-round picks or Jordan Addison? I think that's a fair question. It's at least a debate, right? Because now you're talking about 2 guys who theoretically, based on draft capital, should start for your football team and could end up being great players. Or you have Addison, who showed a lot of promise in year 1. That in itself becomes an interesting debate. But my whole idea behind at least mentioning that is you're not talking about giving up future draft capital. Like the Vikings didn't give up future draft capital to go get McCarthy. I think that's good.
But giving up your first in Jordan Addison versus the question of 2 firsts, with the first in Jordan Addison, you're giving up the 1 first, and you need both situations. So that cancels out. With Jordan Addison, he was a first-round draft pick, and he's a known quantity for another first-round draft pick that should start because he's a first-rounder, but an unknown quantity. I'll take the known quantity every day of the week.
Let me rephrase that, because I think I phrased it poorly. 11 in Jordan Addison or 11 and 2 more first-round picks. That's what I was trying to say. Not just 2 first-round picks in total, because the way my brain works is if you're giving up 2 first-round picks to move up, you're giving up a total of 3 because it's a swap and then 2 first-round picks. That I didn't necessarily phrase that the right way.
So if you're talking, say, we'd have done that for Drake May. If they'd offered the 11.
I would have given up
Jordan
4
Addison.
first-round picks for Drake May. I love Drake May. And you know what? That's an expensive price. But I really think he can be a top 5 quarterback in this league, and I don't think it'll take much to get him there. But we're going to find out
that way in New England when they have nothing around him.
I will say, looking at the roster, I think they're in a better spot than we gave them credit for, but it's still not great. I think the perception is it's like a 2 out of 10. I think it's like a 4.5, which, I mean, it's still not great, but it's also not terrible. So and he didn't exactly play with great stuff at North Carolina. So I actually think he might be okay. But here, oh, good Lord. Here, he could have been real special. And he still may be special, but we'll find out. So let's have a conversation about some of these other picks and some of the other processes that Adofo-Mensah used. And I want to talk about a UDFA that I think is going to end up being the next Ivan Pace. Kyrie Jackson, the cornerback, Oregon. He's 6'3.5", 194 pounds, almost 33-inch arms. So he's tall, and you can tell he's long. But is he good enough? And that's the question I have. I don't know how good of a football player this guy really is, because apparently he was the best cornerback in Alabama's defensive back room the 2 years he was there, 2021 and 2022, with the likes of Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Brian Branch. Well, if he was that good, why wasn't he playing? He only played 250 snaps-ish for the Crimson Tide. Why wasn't he playing? What's the answer to that? And that's a question I don't have an answer to, which to me is a little bit concerning. If you are that good, if you're playing for Nick Saban, you're going to be on the field, at least in a rotational role. He was barely in a backup role. Why? Well, what's the reason behind that? Because there's something there. And the fact that it's there is a concern.
You can see this is Oregon. Obviously, this is his last year. He's got a shoulder brace on. But that's my question. If you're that good, and he told Kwesi or whoever, I'm the best corner. Well, if that's the case, why didn't it work in Alabama? Was there something else? It could have been grades. It could have been disagreement with a teacher, other students, something. It could have been something totally non-football related.
Yeah.
That he moved from Alabama to Oregon. But that still doesn't answer the question of, well, if he was the best in Alabama's corner room, why wasn't he a starter in Alabama's corner room?
Or at the very least, why wasn't he playing? And I would love to have an answer to that, because if people in that room are calling him the most talented player, there's a reason you're not playing. So why? What is it? Like, what's the missing link? What is the variable that we just don't understand? And he is an interesting prospect in the fact that he's 25. Out of high school, he started working at a grocery store, became an employee of the month for how good he cut deli meat. And this isn't a meme or anything. He told the reporters this when the Vikings drafted him. So he's a very interesting prospect, but 25 years old. I thought there were other guys that would have been better fits at better value at that position, but I thought it was a good pick overall, because Brian Flores is going to be able to use this guy in really interesting ways, because he is a capable press man corner. And overall, like, the pick itself was good. I'm so intrigued on what those other questions are, what the things about him not playing. And Gaetano's Christmas channel said that he mentioned politics is why. Okay. Well, did we get a follow-up there? What were the politics? Why were politics a factor in you not playing? What was the difference between you versus Terrion Arnold or Kool-Aid McKinstry when you were more talented? What's the politics there? And I think that portion we should follow up on. We should have those questions where if they give us an answer, but they don't give us the details, let's find out the details. So I do want to shout out a double up who says, Forno, I usually agree with you, but your takes on this Vikings draft have been horrible. Hey, no, that's okay. You're more than welcome to have a differing opinion. I'm more kind of talking about the general overall process, and I'll give my full take on what I actually thought of the Vikings draft as a whole. But my goal is to look at it from every angle, and sometimes those angles aren't necessarily good, but it's good to have honest discussion, and I'm glad you're here for that. Even if you disagree, it's okay to disagree. And if you do, throw some details in the chat. I'd love to hear it. Let's move on.
Do the one. Where is it? This one. Let me throw it up here. Do you know that Houston gave up last year to get what Houston gave up last year to land Will Anderson?
Yeah.
12th overall, 33rd overall.
It was slightly less than the Trey Lance package. It was 12, 33, and a first and a third this year. The Trey Lance package was 12, 2 more first round picks, and a third round pick. So it was very similar. And Will Anderson looks like a massive hit. But in order to get that kind of surplus value back, you got to be that massive hit. Now, the Vikings did not make that type of move to go get Dallas Turner. So he doesn't have to be as good, which it's also really interesting. When you're talking about this Dallas Turner pick, there were many people saying that Turner was better than Will Anderson in college. And I find that really interesting too. Tyler Bauman says Turner's comp is Von Miller. I'm going to be honest. I don't see that. I thought that was more of a Chop Robinson thing. And this is where I'm going to defer to the consensus board probably being right over my evaluation, because I had Turner as more of like a second round grade because I was just so worried about his lack of polish, being that he was a Nick Saban defensive player and how polished a lot of those guys are coming out. And to me, it was a little bit worrisome. Now, somebody mentioned, well, Khalil Mack didn't have college coming out of Buffalo. I'm like, yeah, but the coaching you get at Alabama versus Buffalo, Alabama is basically the 33rd team in the NFL. So I was a little concerned about that. But the consensus really believes in him. And I think Lance Zierlein's comp of Brian Burns fits him really well because of how he plays, his size, and how he tries to win. And you know what? He could easily develop, but I was just a little low on him. And you know what? I'm okay with that. But the consensus loves him. And I think in itself, when you talk about process, I think that's a really good thing. But my question for the audience here is, do you believe Dallas Turner is good enough where you would have given up a Will Anderson package? The Vikings didn't give up a Will Anderson package, but would you have given that up? I'd honestly like to hear some thoughts on that, because I think that context is very interesting. Yeah, and Double Up says he thinks he will be. It's all about projection. What are you going to do for my team in the future? Not what you've already done. Turner hasn't reached his peak yet. I agree, he hasn't reached his peak yet, but can he get there? When you have a guy that's this athletic and this raw, it is a real projection. And if he hits, oh, good Lord, can it be great? If he doesn't, it's more of a concern. So my goal is to just provide what I think the different outcomes are. And I have concerns about Turner, and I'm okay with that. Hey, you know what? If I'm wrong, you guys will all be the first to admit it. I'll be like, yeah, I was a little too concerned about this, that, and the other thing, but we'll see how it goes. And that's the good part about this process. It's very interesting. And some of the things that you think matter don't end up mattering. And some of the things that you don't think will matter end up mattering a hell of a lot, because every player is very, very different. But I do wish they would have got Chop Robinson. That's the last I'll say about that. Let's talk about the 6th round pick, Walter Rouse. This dude is probably the smartest player on the Minnesota Vikings right now. He went to Stanford, got a degree in biomechanical engineering, and then transferred to Oklahoma for his final season, where he did not allow a single snap in 480 plus pass rush reps. That's pretty impressive. I think he's got the ability to be a swing tackle at the next level. He's not necessarily great when it comes to speed. He does not handle speed rushers very well. He's not the quickest guy. I think he's like a 76th percentile athlete, but he's really good in short spaces. Kind of think of the phone booth. Rouse is good in a phone booth, but he's a tackle. He is not necessarily a guy you want to kick into guard. So I think this is a really capable swing tackle. Think of the next Oli Udoh. That's kind of what this guy is. And considering the intelligence level, I love the pick. I think it's a good value. I think it's a smart move. Guy you can play on both sides of the line. And you have somebody who's incredibly smart. Like, these are the kind of swings you want to make. All right. Now let's get to the kicker, Will Reichard. I didn't love the pick because the people that I talked to who know how to scout kickers really, really, really well did not like the pick of Reichard, considering Joshua Carty, Cam Little, Harrison Mevis were all on the board, where those guys had those guys higher than Reichard. But let's take a look at Reichard's profile as a general whole. He was a kicker for Alabama, which is a super high pressure cooker. And he made 84 out of 100 kicks, including 10 of 13 from 50 plus, including only a high of 52, which also is important to note because a 52-yard field goal is a lot different than like 56, 57. But he was successful from the long range, and he only missed 2 extra points in college. So, like, overall, he seems like a good prospect when you just look at the paper, but he does not have the strongest leg. But we don't have to really worry about him with touchbacks, because touchbacks are not going to exist this upcoming season because of the new kickoff rule. And Dallas Turner called him on KFan yesterday, cold-blooded sniper. So the Vikings wanted to take this guy. I'll get over it. I would have preferred Cam Little or Joshua Carty and even Harrison Mevis because they have much better and bigger legs. But if he hits, doesn't matter. But I still wouldn't have drafted a kicker here. I would have prioritized another position. Christian Mahogany went a couple picks later, who I thought could have potentially been a starter on the offensive line. We've talked about that, but he's a Minnesota Viking, so we'll see how it plays out. Kicker is such a volatile position, which is why it's difficult to really spend a draft asset on it, because you can unless you find a Justin Tucker, Matt Gay, where they're like a top 5 kicker, they can pretty much be interchanged and you don't have too much of a difference.
Yeah. Could be. What I worry about is John Parker Romer is going to outkick him in training camp. Mm-hmm. And John Parker Romer will be released and we keep this kid because we drafted him.
Hey, that's a very, very good point, because you could have just brought in another kicker for competition for John Parker Romo, because the Vikings gave him a 2-year deal, but they really didn't guarantee much money. So it's fine.
Yeah,
like UDFA signed 3-year deals, but you can cut them for pretty much nothing unless like you're only talking about bonus money at that point. So we'll see how it goes.
Fast forward to 2025. How many starters do we see from this class? He sees 4.
If you include the kicker, I think 4 is a fair number. I'm not 100% sure Kyrie Jackson's going to be better than like Andrew Booth Jr., Caleb Evans, Mekhi Blackman. Is Byron Murphy Jr. going to be on the team next year? Who are they going to add at corner next offseason? Like, I think Kyrie Jackson has a shot to play as a rookie, but will he be a starter next year? I'd give it around a 30% chance, for the sole fact that there's other players on the roster that also have really good potential. And 2 more picks to go.
R. I agree with you. He's this dude. His whole life wanted to be nothing but an NFL kicker for the most part. Mm-hmm. Got heart. I got to give him that. And if he's a sniper, as in cold-blooded, doesn't get high, doesn't get low, does the meditation thing, where the blood heartbeat drops to less than 60 beats a minute so a sniper can take a shot type of deal. And I'm not the one to be talking about this, but where it drops dead next to nothing and he nails it every time, hey, great.
Yeah. 2 more to go through real quick, and then I want to talk about the UDFA class. Michael Juergens, center from Wake Forest. Same with Levi Drake Rodriguez, who was the other 7th round pick from Texas A&M Commerce. These guys are 6-year players, and I find that very interesting because early on, the Vikings took basically 2 of the 3 youngest players in the class in Dallas Turner and JJ McCarthy, but they prioritized older players with experience with their later picks. And I find that very interesting because older players with experience in later rounds can theoretically give you better production right away and are less of a inherent risk. Where early on, if you hit with that younger player, you get a massive amount of surplus value because when they sign their second contract, they haven't even reached their athletic prime yet. So Juergens, center, has guard flexibility. Talking with Luke Brown of Locked On Vikings, who did a little tape watch. Good football player. He kind of looks like a similar profile of Garrett Bradbury, where there's just not a lot of sand in the pants, and he can get bull rushed a little bit. But 7th round player, 6 years of experience. Luke says he believes he can play. I'll take that. I'll take that all day. But we'll find out. I have not had a chance to dive into his tape. Same with Levi Drake Rodriguez, who has a very intriguing pass rush profile at about 300 pounds. Started at the Southwest Assemblies of God college, where it's an NAIA school, which is a smaller division than Division III. And he transferred up to the FCS, and he has some good reps on tape. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah mentioned that this was essentially a gift for the scouts. The scouts found him, loved him, so they brought him in. And he is going to have a real chance to make the team because of how incredibly not deep the defensive line is. I'm not entirely sure what their process is in the fact that they haven't really added much to the defensive line. Jerry Tillery and Jonah Williams isn't exactly what you would call high-end talent. But
you're talking about Juergens or Rodriguez?
Rodriguez. I think they both have a real chance to make the team. Will they make the team? I don't know. 7th round picks. It's a toss up. But the idea with both players is get guys who are experienced, who still have some growth potential, and maybe they can turn into good rotational players. And in the case of Juergens, he's going to provide you inexpensive depth on the offensive line, which is something we talked about a lot. And the Vikings really, really needed it. Overall, I thought this Vikings team did a pretty good job. Everything is going to hinge on those first 2 picks. I gave them a B+. I know it sounds like I'm super negative about the process, and I think that there is a good amount to be negative on, and there's a good amount to really be concerned about with a long-term lens and focus. But overall, they got 2 really, really good football players, and I was a fan of that. Now let's kind of look at the UDFA class, where there's 2 different ways you can look at it. 1, they got 17 guys, which means 17 more bites at the apple. 2, they had to sign 17 UDFAs to fill out the roster. That doesn't necessarily sound like a great thing. Now, I don't have an issue with it like some other people are going to, because you're going to have to cut 37 players to get to your final 53. 10 to 16 of them are going to end up on the practice squad. So let's say you just have to cut 21 straight players. Okay. You have 17 UDFAs. Most often UDFAs don't make the roster, and sometimes they don't make the practice squad. So objectively, I think it's a fine number. It just stinks that this was the year where you had all this UDFA talent, because this was a very shallow draft class. But I will say the consensus board did rank this, Arif Hassan's consensus board, that is, as the top UDFA class, because they had they were the only team to have 2 players in the top 200, with Gabriel Murphy at 111 and Dwight McGlothern, the cornerback from Arkansas, at 189. They also had a 3rd player in the top 300 with tight end Trey Knox out of South Carolina. I believe he was 254th. So you're looking at a really good UDFA class. I'm intrigued by the Mercer wide receivers. Devron Harper and Ty James, they put up monster numbers for Mercer this past year. And I'm thinking one of them may be able to make the team, but I'm going to watch them and I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a synopsis. But before we go, I think we need to talk about the guy who I think is the next Ivan Pace Jr., and that's UCLA edge rusher Gabriel Murphy. He fits a similar profile, undervalued, undersized player who had a round 4 consensus board grade. And Jason, that's incredibly kind of you. Thank you. We're going to be here all off season. We're not going anywhere, and we're going to have the same unfiltered and honest takes. Hey, you know what? And the best part is when you guys don't agree, because then we can have some good conversation on it. So Murphy, just over 6'2", 249 pounds.
All the time.
No. Honest discussion between people who don't agree is something this country needs more of, especially when it comes to sports discourse. So you don't agree, tell me. But don't just tell me. Tell me why. Because then we can have a discussion and we can have fun. So let's talk about Murphy because I do think he's an X7 pace. Like I said, slightly over 6'2", 249 pounds. He's undervalued because his arm length is 30 and 6/8 inches, which is incredibly small for an edge rusher. And it was also really interesting because UCLA had him line up in the A gap a lot and in the B gap as an interior rusher because his quickness, he could beat guards and centers pretty easily. And to me, that's a little bit of a concern for most teams because if you're an edge rusher and they don't want to play you on the edge when you're 250 pounds, how can I expect you to beat really, really good guards in the NFL doing the same thing? Interior offensive linemen in the NFL are so much better than in college. So to me, that's a little bit of a concern. But I'm also not that concerned for the Vikings because Brian Flores knows how to use players like this. He proved it with Ivan Pace last year, who played nearly 1,000 snaps. And he was a 4th-round pick, way undersized. A pass rushing specialist at inside linebacker, not something you see very often. So when you have those factors, and then you have Murphy, who I gave a 4th-round grade to, I thought he could be a really good rotational guy if used correctly in the right defense. And I think Brian Flores can get that out of him. I'm really intrigued to see what Murphy's going to do in the NFL. I think it was a great move by the Minnesota Vikings to bring him in. And all of a sudden, there are a couple of UDFAs who could potentially make the team and make this team better. This is a really good crop of guys. We'll find out if any of them are actually going to be good. And we have Christian Darrisaw here as well, who got his 5th-year option exercise, slightly over $16 million for the 2025 season, which is good money. And that's it. This Vikings process is going to be fascinating to continue to watch over time. I'm going to take a look at some of the athletic score data over the next week or two and see, are we starting to see any more trends with how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is prioritizing athletes at certain positions? And I think that's going to be really, really interesting to find out. And there's a lot of data we just don't know. And we're going to parse it all out and try to figure it out. And I think that's a really important thing.
What is your take on the rumors about they may go after the wide receiver from Cincinnati in free agency?
I think that's all it is. I don't think there's any truth to it right now. I have not heard it from anybody who has credibility for having like some of these. I think, you know what my honest opinion is, and this is going to sound really conceited, but I don't mean it to. I put him in an article of 5 players the Vikings could target now that the compensatory formula for period is over. And I think that's where that came from. That at the Sporting News, or you can scroll my Twitter and I have it there. If you search Tyler Forness, the Sporting News, my author page will pop right up. Tomorrow, all the team pages will be fully finalized. That's what I was told. Yay! So I know, thank goodness, it'll be a lot easier to find all my stuff. But I don't think that that's based in truth. I think it's just trying to stir up conversation for engagement. But that's just my personal opinion. It could be true. I just don't think it is. But Boyd would be great. I think he would fit in really well. I think he'd be a really good mentor for Jefferson and Addison. Now remember, Jefferson's going into year 5 in the league, but that doesn't mean he still can't learn. Everybody can learn every single day. And having a guy who's been in the league for so long, like Tyler Boyd, who is a similar frame and knows how to win from the outside and in the slot, I think it'd be a massive benefit to Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So I would prefer Odell Beckham Jr. because I think the offense that the Vikings run, he's already played in and shown he can thrive. There's the LSU connection with him and Justin Jefferson. So you know that they have some semblance of a relationship already. And probably Ed Ingram, Jaquelin Roy, Jay Ward as well, I think could be a really good benefit for the Vikings. We'll find out.
Mm-hmm. Good luck. Good last question from Double Up. He's not familiar with cap stuff. Why do the Vikings still have $17 million available?
Okay, so let's talk about the cap stuff and then Double Up. I did see that you asked about Zay Jones. I like the idea of Zay Jones. I think he'd be a really good wide receiver 3. I don't know what any of these guys are going to cost. So that's part of it too. This next wave of free agency is the wave after that compensatory formula. So these guys could get quite a few $1 million, and I wouldn't be surprised. So they have $17 million. Effective cap space, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is how much cap space you have after you sign your draft class. Because your draft class is basically slotted. They're going to make X amount of money. And then how you structure their contract is usually a massive amount of it being signing bonus. So you have to essentially have that set aside to cover those contracts. So the Vikings have $11 million after those contracts will end up being signed, which then you're also going to have to pay the practice squad. So each practice squad guy gets between $210 and I think $350,000. So if you sign 15 of those guys, you're probably looking at around $4 or $5 million just for the practice squad. So then in turn, you're down to about $6 million in cap space. So you have $6 million to play with for in-season signings, any signings you want to do right now. And that's not including a potential Justin Jefferson or Christian Darrisaw extension, which could end up shrinking the cap even more for this year and giving you more space. So 17 million feels like a lot. It's going to be eaten up really quick. So the Vikings don't have a ton of room. They could sign Odell Beckham Jr. like $3 or $4 million contract, theoretically, and still have enough room to be able to accomplish everything else that they need to. But it's a good spot to be in because they have flexibility, but they have to use up a good amount of that money.
Mm-hmm. Chris, so I can tell you, selecting that QB is always the best for any GM, period. Always.
Mm-hmm.
What have you got going tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night, Pro Football Focus's Sam Munson will be joining the show. We're going to get his takes on the draft class. We're going to talk about his theory on the Minnesota Vikings and how they're utilizing process and whether it's good or bad. And I really like what Sam's going to bring to the table because not only is he analytic in a lot of his thinking, but he also grinds a lot of tape. So you're going to get him talking theoretically out of both sides of the mouth, which I think is a good thing because he's very knowledgeable at a little bit of everything. And I think that perspective is going to be really good in contrast to what we bring, because I don't bring a ton of the analytical data. A lot of what I bring is more of the film stuff. And I'm excited to kind of just talk shop and kind of see how he's viewing the team, how he's viewing the process, and where we're at with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah after 3 years. I think it's going to be really interesting to hear his takes, his opinions, and we're going to have a lot of fun Wednesday night.
It's going to be a blast. And then Thursday this week, we're going to have the NFC North show. It'll be over on Bleachers to Speakers, and it'll be fire because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And to pick on the Green Bay Packers, of course, and their love for short-armed linemen. So that will be coming. And then, of course, 2-0 bloggers on the weekend.
Yeah. And anytime something breaks, keep an eye out for Justin Jefferson extension. That can come any day. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah specifically said we wanted to give him his own week. We did not want him to have to deal with the draft. So as early as next week, we could be having that conversation. Until then, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell because, hey, you never know when power is going to go out again, and we have to go at noon on a Tuesday. And we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to know whenever we're going live. The easiest way to do that is subscribe and ring the bell. And the easiest way to support the show is those super chats like Jason also graciously sent, or become a member. And it's just an easy way. Plus, we're looking for sponsors. If you want to sponsor the show, reach out and we'll have a conversation. Until then, I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings, baby.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching the Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone.